from the very beginning, a lot of the conversation about the war in Ukraine here in the United States has been about what our obligation is, what our responsibility or duty is to assist Ukraine when they're being attacked in this way. And obviously there's a lot of history that goes into that. Ukraine had willingly given up their weapons of mass destruction in exchange for the promises of future support. Worries about a precedent being set where, well, if we don't assist them, why would any country willingly give up these weapons if we can't tell them plausibly that we're going to help them? And I say we, I don't mean the United States, I mean, the collective, nations of the world, if we just allow this country to be conquered. So in any event, that debate has gone through a lot of different iterations, but along the way, a lot of money has been spent. Here is some of the updated figures, at least pledges of $77.6 billion from the United States. A significant chunk of the $166 billion in combined military, humanitarian, and financial aid that's been pledged by 40 different countries and groups, at least to roughly the beginning of this year. It's a lot of money. We are far and away the largest individual contributor. And David, there's a lot more, I think, opposition to that, very vocal opposition from right wingers who've now taken over Congress, people like Tucker Carlson. I'm curious what you think about the state of that debate.
Well, and it gets to, look, Republicans don't have a problem spending money when they have their president as a Republican and a Republican Congress, perhaps. And then it's, okay, Katie barred the door, let's spend as much money as we need on military and military industrial complex. Now that the Democrats have control of the White House, of course, the last 2 years, it's, oh no, wait a second, now we need to be more thrifty. We need to be more careful about how we spend money in general. And then, oh, by the way, the fact that the United States is helping Ukraine try to protect its freedom, somehow that becomes a problem for a lot of Republicans who for so many years said, well, the reason that we need a super strong military where we spend more than the next 10 military budgets combined around the world is because we need to protect freedom. We need to protect democracy. Well, okay, that's what we're doing now by trying to help Ukraine, but somehow that's too much money. So it doesn't make a lot of sense in terms of the political right for me.
Yeah, a lot of that, like that lofty language. It seemed pretty clear from the beginning that was just being used to justify massive spending, and it wasn't an actual, honest ideological commitment. That's been proven many times over. Look, I don't know how ready the Republican Party is going to be to approve of, greater pledges. We've had minor additional pledges just in the last week or so. And it also might be that even if more money is allocated going forward, that there might be the expectation of either more diplomatic pressure being tied to it, or to the extent that that might already exist, more acknowledgement of it, perhaps. So I'm curious if you have any thoughts about, like, people have been saying that it should be tied to a willingness to make concessions to Russia going forward, let them keep the eastern portion or whatever. As of right now, Volodymyr Zelensky seems to have no interest in anything like that.
It's a good point. I think you look politically, you're going to see sort of a difference between the U.S. House, Republican controlled, and the U.S. Senate, which is sort of an even split. In the Senate, you have Lindsey Graham, a number of Republican sort of hawks who are adamant about continuing to keep funding Ukraine, to send them tens of billions of dollars. So, and I think that's where the administration will continue to be able to go. And I think the House will essentially grudgingly go along with some Republicans saying, no, we need to spend money here at home. But I think the Congress is going to continue to approve the budgets. It would be really interesting at a certain point, though, if there's a serious peace plan that is put on the table and the United States can then say, okay, look, here's some conditions that we need you to embrace in order for the money to keep going. There's been a peace plan put forward by the Chinese, which is not seen as that serious by a lot of foreign policy experts in the United States. But nonetheless, I think there should come a point where the money is hinged upon Ukraine being able to accept some sort of rational end to all this, as opposed to a war of attrition.
Yeah, well, as of right now, at least, I know this doesn't, I think, factor into the conversation much, but I was curious, what do the American people actually think about this? Because at the end of the day, maybe it shouldn't just come down to what Marjorie Greene thinks. 48% in a recent Associated Press NORC Center for Public Affairs research poll say they favor the US providing weapons to Ukraine, 29% opposed. 22% say they're neither favor nor opposed. So less than 1/3 actually are opposed to this continuing. It was higher back in May 2022. 60% said that they were in favor of sending Ukraine weapons. So some drop in that. It's still the plurality. In terms of just sending direct government funds, 37% are in favor, 38% opposed. So that is much more divisive, the just direct transfer of money rather than spending money here and sending it over. Also, oddly enough, like, well, the Republicans would be against, at least rhetorically, against both of those. In theory, spending the money on weapons here and sending them is the end goal of all of the military-industrial complex anyway. Do you especially care who's pointing the rifle after it's been paid for? They say that they do. I have a feeling that whatever money goes allocated to them, it's just gonna be allocated to our military anyway. So if you're a conservative, understand they're not talking about cutting spending on the military, just that the packages might go domestically rather than international.
Yeah, and the other part about it is that's such a great point, because the military-industrial complex, they do have their own lobbyists, which will twist the arms of Republicans in the House who may be opposed to sending more aid and say, look, this is going to be another few thousand jobs for Raytheon or any of these companies that are producing these weapons. But the other part about it is, you mentioned this sort of poll. I think there's sort of there's a characteristic of Americans who we like to bet on winners. I think if Ukraine had been getting creamed and they had not been able to hold the territory, I think Americans would be far more reluctant to provide them with more and more money. But because Ukraine looks like they're right in this fight, there's a chance they might be able to expel the Russians. I think as long as they're able to put up that very strong defense, you will continue to see Americans saying, hey, let's invest more and more money in helping them try to win this thing.
Yeah, I think that that's 100% right. I think that there is socially, we like an underdog. I think that plays into it. They're aided by the fact that Ukrainians are white, so a lot of Americans are going to find that to be much more sympathetic than if this was a conflict that was happening in a different part of the world. So let's not forget the racial component to all of this that played into some of the initial conversation about migrants and all that. And also, while the Republicans now have people like Marjorie, Greene, and Tucker Carlson who are every day trying to convince their base that Vladimir Putin is the coolest guy ever, those same Republican viewers had decades of Fox News telling them that the communist regime was so bad and everything. So there's got to be a little bit of lingering confusion on the part of like regular conservatives. Like, wasn't this guy supposed to be bad? I get that he's trying to drive the LGBTQ community in Russia into the shadows. I like that, but I feel like my entire life you were telling me he was bad. So maybe there's some confusion there.
Yeah, and look, you're absolutely right. I mean, Fox News, the majority of the Republican Party, for so long advocated a strong U.S. foreign policy, engagement, using U.S. power, military and otherwise, to sort of dictate the terms of the world the way the United States wanted. I think there's always been something of a sort of sliver within the Republican Party, that the Pat Buchanan types who say, hey, no, we need to draw back in. We need to not care as much about foreign policy, take our troops home, focus more on the United States and sort of this anti-US involvement. And some of that strain is sort of bubbling up now with Tucker Carlson and Marjorie Taylor Greene. I think it's not just that they love Russia, but they are part of this sort of political wing, which increasingly thinks America first, only America. That's all we should care about. It's a real divide within the Republican Party, and sort of fascinating to watch them argue it. I just think that the isolationists, if you want to call them that, they're not going to be able to go very far in the current climate, the way things are going in Ukraine.
For more political news, breakdowns, interviews, stories of activism, and me trying my hardest to care about the occasional big celebrity news story, subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/The Damage Report. And you can ring the bell wherever it is so you don't miss anything.